Hey everybody, welcome back to Top Doses, and welcome back to Dr. Shirley Paulson. Hi, Dr. Paulson.
Hey, so good to be with you again. Thanks.
Yeah, it's really fantastic having you on because we have something exhilarating to discuss, which is Dr. Paulson has put together a free, that's right folks, free Nag Hammadi and related texts course. Although you can pay a very reasonable fee to do it as a hybrid with with you guiding it. Is that right, Shirley?
That's right. Yeah, thanks. That's true.
Yeah, so we're starting off with the commercial, folks. Go to earlychristiantext.com and check out all the courses there. But the one we were talking about is the Nag Hammadi and related text. So, Shirley, can you tell us about the course and something that I'm really fascinated by, which is what inspired you to put it together? And of course, you had to go out and get, well, you didn't have to, but it sure makes it easier. But you went out and got funding for this. So, why this over another topic related to early Christian texts?
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is that probably we share a real enthusiasm for the fact that these texts are, I don't know, just amazing. They're remarkable. And I I often ask people, like in public, I say, have you ever heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? And most people say, yeah. I said, have you heard of Nag Hammadi? And they go, huh? So I go, oh my gosh, they're so important. And so I've been looking for a long time to find a way to help people know what they are. And it's hard to put a course out there and have people pay for it when they have no clue what it's about. So I was very, very excited to get this grant from the AAR Loose grant to be able to produce this course for free so people can learn what it is or why it's not only exciting, but I think really important. So back to your question about why I did it to make it free for people to find access to it, but also just to get into these courses, these texts that are generally surprising. And I think they're surprising because people have heard they might be suspect, they might be something's wrong with them, and they don't know what to do about that. So I'm just trying to make it accessible so people can decide for themselves whether they're worth looking at.
Yeah. Why do you think that everybody knows about the Dead Sea Scrolls, which at least maybe they're not experts, but I feel like if I just grab somebody off the street, literally, and started shouting in their face, have you heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Which if they didn't run away or call the police, they would probably say yes. Where just as you were saying, Nag Hammadi, I think, I'd probably go straight to prison if I tried that on the street. It just seems like the general public, at least if they can't describe what they are, have been like, oh yeah, I've heard about those, but why those and not Nag Hammadi?
Yeah, exactly. I I have a lot of theories about this, and I don't really know, but some of my theories have to do with the fact that the scholars who do know about them have originally or early on thought of Nag Hammadi as being um, heresy, being wrong. They don't belong in the right kind of way of doing religion. So they have this sort of negative baggage that goes with it before anybody even opens up the suitcase to see what's in there. And so I think so when that gets filtered down through the pews and out into the public, people just sort of think, "Oh, I don't need to look at that because it's not right." So they don't look at it and they don't think about what it is. But they've heard that Dead Sea Scrolls, because I think in general they tend to back up what we know about the Old Testament or the Hebrew writings. And Nag Hammadi has been such a surprise. I think scholars haven't known what to do about it. And I think slowly but surely they're finding that the issue is not heresy. The issue is how do we deal with the fact that these texts paint such a different picture from what we thought was going on soon after Jesus. So I think we're dealing with the fact that it's been a surprise and we haven't really known what to do about the surprise. That's my theory.
Yeah, fascinating. So, how did you choose which Nag Hammadi text to cover? And as people probably picked up, I was saying Nag Hammadi and the related texts, other texts. What about those texts that you chose to cover that are not in the Nag Hammadi? So why those?
Yeah, well, it was, as you can imagine, there are 100 different texts to choose from. And I'm trying to make this accessible for people. So how do you choose? There are several things that were important to me. One was to show the diversity of these texts, like they're not all saying the same thing, and we're so used to thinking of the early Christian writings as being one way. There's only one way to think about it. And yet these texts are so diverse. They're not just against the Bible, and they're not even just one way. They're just diverse among themselves. So that was important to show a little bit of diversity. But also I wanted to show the text that people can kind of get into quickly and easily. For example, one of them was the Gospel of Mary. And since Mary Magdalene is in the canonical writings, and people generally like her, I thought she would be a good kind of connecting point between what's in the Bible and what's outside the Bible. But then there again, the Gospel of Mary is not really in the Nag Hammadi collection. So it's related because it's outside the Bible, but it's also not exactly in Nag Hammadi. So I had to make it Nag Hammadi and related text for that reason.
So the course is all hits, and it's not just you teaching it and lecturing it. You have some other amazing scholars. Can you tell us about some of these other scholars, like who's there as well?
Yeah, I was really pleased with this. I have, over the years, I've developed wonderful relationships with scholars who have, special expertise in different areas. And I tried to draw on those who have devoted themselves to some special ways of looking at these different texts. So I can just tell you who they are. There are 6 sections in the course, and each section I have one scholar that talks about some specialty in that area. So for the first one, again with Mary Magdalene, I asked Deborah Niederer Saxon to come and talk about that. And then in the Gospel of Thomas, I have Samuel Zinner. And then I talked to Tony Burke, who is such an expert in the Apocrypha and all the things, not only extra canonical, but just beyond. So he's talking about how do we understand the disciples after Jesus, which is I think, a huge interest to people. And then I asked Celine Lilly to talk about kind of an overview of Nag Hammadi. She's a real expert in just Nag Hammadi, where it came from, what's in it, why it matters. And she's a translator herself. So she was a great person to talk to about that. And then I talked to Hal Tassig about the letter of Peter to Philip, which is one of the texts in Nag Hammadi. And he is the one who really introduced me to the letter of Peter to Philip and showed me why it's such a very special text. And it's different from the others in the sense that I think it's the only one that really talks about violence and how Jesus would help us think about violence so specifically. So that's an example of something that's diverse, but also I had that expertise from Hal Tossick in that one too. Then the last one is on the Odes of Solomon, and that's where I got Natalie Perkins to talk to us, and she is she did some wonderful compositions with those. So all 6 of them are wonderful friends who participated in the project.
Yeah. Um, what might be some issues if I take this course to study and I put it in scare quotes in my notes, quote unquote Gnosticism, or maybe they've just read the Da Vinci Code or seen the movie and they want to know more and they want to know more about these so-called heresies. If I take the course from that lens, what might surprise me, disturb me, take me back?
Okay, yeah. And I do want to address those things directly, not hide them, because I think we need to understand why they're controversial and what the issues are. First of all, I just think it's helpful to think about the word heresy itself, because in the early centuries, that word really just meant originally um, a choice. Like you can choose this or choose that. So it wasn't choosing a good thing or bad thing. It was just simply choosing maybe an alternative way of thinking or studying or whatever. So later, the word choice became bad choice, and then wrong choice because it didn't fit with my choice. So then the word heresy became wrong. So when we're reading these texts, we need to think about them more like in terms of a school of thought rather than a bad thing. That's one thing that I think is surprising, that they don't really come across as a secret attack on the good thing. It's really a very interesting idea to think about. So then I think another surprising thing is to really think about the, diversity, which I already mentioned before, but the reason that's such an important thing is that most of Christianity has been saying for a long time, there's only one way to think about it. Now, in the modern world, we're very accustomed to having lots of different denominations, but each denomination tends to say, but we have the right one. And it's always about, we're right and you're not quite right, or you might be terribly wrong, but it's about who's right and who's wrong. But really, in those first centuries after Jesus, there wasn't any particular interest in trying to prove right and wrong. It was really about, I have an idea. Here's my idea. Here's another idea. And I'm going to build on that idea. And so there just that diversity was more um, positive then. And there was just innovation going on, which is so refreshing. Even I think still today, we have a difficulty speaking in diversity because we're afraid of not being right. So that's something that I think is fun. Then, of course, we do talk about just what does Gnosticism mean? And it's so hard to define that word, mainly because, frankly, I don't think it means anything. um, it does and doesn't. Every time I think scholars try to define the word, it's a slippery word and it slips right out of your fingers because when you try to say, well, it's because of this characteristic or that characteristic, then you can find an example that's not so. And so then you try to find, well, okay, well, it's all you can really say about it is it's against the things that we thought were right. And then it becomes a negative thing instead of what it is. So that's why I think the word is difficult. But I think one of the main ideas that the word comes from gnosis, and gnosis, you all with talk gnosis would know this better than anybody. Gnosis really is just understanding and a thinking, seeking a spiritual depth to things that comes about through understanding as opposed to believing in something, whether you understand it or not. So I think that's kind of a major theme that comes across in a lot of these texts is that gnosis is an encouragement to think and to find an understanding of yourself and of your relationship to the divine, as opposed to that kind of be right or and believe it. Those I think are the main issues I think that we talk about.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's quite interesting that for modern ears, right, that the word heresy just means choice. And I think lots of people out there would be like, wait a minute, why, how can that be a bad thing? Right? That sounds like a wonderful thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
right.
and, also on the topic, there's maybe Gnosticism isn't helpful to talk about these ancient groups and schools of thought. I find it sometimes helpful to talk about modern phenomenon, the denominational or interests of modern people kind of drawing on these sources.
Yeah.
And I meet a lot of people online who are interested in so-called Gnosticism, the Gnostics, the Nag Hammadi texts, and they've been hurt by Christianity. So they see these texts as oppositional, as alternatives to what we have in the Bible, and there's so much richness reading the Gospel of John and then the secret Gospel of John, right? But
Yeah.
the flows back and forth that okay, all of a sudden I have a greater appreciation for this canonical text,
Yeah.
seeing this extension, commentary, new ideas that I didn't see in there that these texts are opening my eyes to. And of course, the other way around, right? The Secret Book of John, you can spend the rest of your life trying to understand it. It's a very dense text. It's very fun to read, though. And of course, reading the Gospel of John and reflecting back into the Secret Book of John is a wonderful thing. Or the Gospel of Thomas and reading the canonical side by side. So I hope people out there, and I understand that forms of Christianity have really hurt people, right? Like I do get that, but if you're keeping this connection, you want to keep this connection going through the Nag Hammadi texts, through modern Gnosticism. Don't be afraid to go back to those canonical sources and read them hand in hand, and that might even open up an avenue for healing when you see how sometimes these canonical texts have been abused and misinterpreted, and the opportunities that are there.
Could I say something about that very point that I so agree with is that the other half of the name of my website is called Early Christian Texts, colon, the Bible and Beyond. And so I so agree with you that the things that are beyond something that's important. So the Bible can't really be disconnected from the extra-canonical writings. They belong together. I think of it often as like cousins and relatives that you may not have known before. Like you may have your own little family that you know very well, but then when you discover you have cousins you didn't even know were out there, they tell you a lot more about your family that you didn't even know. And I think that that's a helpful way to see how these texts help us to know the Bible better, and the Bible helps us to know the cousins better. So we all need each other.
Absolutely. Now we all bring our biases, our presuppositions, conscious and unconscious, to everything we read, right? So when we hear that these are Gnostic texts, that they come from schools of Gnosticism, if people have heard those words right away, they have some biases and assumptions. And you have a lecture in there about Gnostic cliches that kind of addresses this, and how it can really sometimes stop us from reading and experiencing what the texts are trying to say. So what are some of these Gnostic cliches, as you call them?
Yeah, it's cliche is a good word because it shows you right away that it doesn't really have depth of meaning, and that's where the problem is. I think that when people hear these different cliches, they tend to think on the surface why they don't like it, and then they don't go far enough to know what they're talking about. So maybe the first cliche that I'm concerned with is that when people say they, meaning the Gnostics, don't like the Jewish God of the Hebrew Bible, I think that's quite wrong. That I think that's a different understanding of the way the divine works throughout the Hebrew Bible, but it's not that they don't like that Jewish God. So that's a cliche I disagree with. Another one is that the Gnostics don't like the world and they want to escape it. I think that's false also. I think there is a struggle with being materialistic or so worldly that you can't find the divine. Yes, that's a problem, but it doesn't mean that you need to escape it. It means that you rethink it and you find a better way to live in the world. So that's another one. Related to that, I would say would be the argument that the Gnostics, don't even like their own bodies, and they want to escape them too. But I think again that has to do with, even the way Paul in the Bible talks about the problems with the flesh, the sarx, the Greek word for flesh, meaning that there's a problem being, again, I think of it as materialism. So it's not the body that's the problem; it's the thought about the body. The body isn't your end all be all. There's something more to your life than that. So again, it's not that you have to escape your body. You find, in fact, I think there's a very much of a healing message in these texts that helps you to find more self-government over your body rather than hating it. I think another one that bothers me is the way they'll accuse Gnostics of having no ethical values. That, but I think it's ironic because Gnostics are often accused of being both ascetic and licentious at the same time, meaning that they're too loose and too strict with their moral behavior at the same time. To me, that's an example of showing that they just don't like them. So you get accused of two opposite extremes. In fact, I think there's so much evidence that both the people who became, what do we call it, doctrinal, and people who are in the Gnostic group did practice asceticism more than we do today. And it was in sort of both communities. And I would say that probably everybody was being licentious too, in different ways. So I think that the problem is that they would interpret the text to say, when they're talking about ways of thinking about the body, they would say, "Oh, there's proof that they're being all absorbed in their bodies, or they're having an orgy or something." But what they're really doing is kind of like the way a traditional Christian would eat the body of Christ. Well, that sounds like cannibalism, but there's a deep spiritual meaning to it. And it's the same thing with some of these other texts too, is that there's a deep spiritual meaning to it. It's not just simply being licentious or ascetic with the body. And so then I think maybe the last one I would mention would be that I don't like is the fact that they say that the Gnostics were thought of themselves as being superior to everybody else from birth, that they were just born better than everybody because they're spiritual. And if they're not Gnostic, then there's something wrong with them and they're inferior, and that therefore the Gnostics have the right to be arrogant. Again, I don't think that's true. I think that's a misreading of the uh, um, at least some of the texts. I'm not saying they're all the same because they're so different, but I think many of them are pointing out the difference between having a spiritual orientation and a material focus in life. And the spiritual orientation means that you turn your heart and soul to a divine way of thinking and living. And when you do, you find yourself with joy and freedom and understanding. And when you understand something, people who don't understand it feel like they're left out. And I think that business of being left out or being not understanding what others understand is where that comes from. I suppose there are some people who feel like, well, if I understand what you don't understand, then I am superior to you. But um, I don't think most of them think of themselves as being born that way. So those are the sort of major cliches that I think are our problem.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And talking about the hate of the body and wanting to escape the body, I mean, you can read stuff from other Christian groups, proto-Orthodox Christian thinkers and Greek philosophers from the time that these texts come out of, right? And they are much more extreme with this asceticism and this body hate and this want for escape. And if even if you don't want to the just stick in this time period of the first couple Christian centuries, I mean, we got a lot of Christian writings in the last 2,000 years of people being pretty down on the body and pretty down on the world and wanting to get out of the world and looking forward to getting out of the world.
Yeah.
So I don't, and as I said, some of these examples are more extreme than what we see. You know, I'm going to link up your previous shows in the show notes, right? We talked about the Secret Gospel of John, the Secret Book of John, the Apocryphon of John, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
and the letter of Peter to Philip,
Great.
because you mentioned how these texts are actually talking about how to live in the world, and that's something that you address in both of those shows. But it's something that I need to do, I don't know, a whole show on just that topic, a whole mini series, because it is such a misunderstanding, and I think there's so much profundity there when we realize that's what the texts are doing, right?
Yeah.
The teaching us how to live in this world, which I think, particularly at the point that we're at now, a lot of people are really feeling that the world is a dark place, and they're kind of feeling touched by that darkness, right?
Yeah.
The people are very stressed out, even if their day-to-day lives are good. They have some stability with job, family, whatever. So I think that these texts can really help people, in this dark time. I mean, it's always a dark time and it's always a light time, right? There's always stuff going on which ain't great, and there's always stuff going on which is that makes it all worthwhile. But that seems to be the general vibe of today. So I hope that people do go back, watch those shows, take this course, and hopefully these texts and these philosophies can help you when the alarm goes off tomorrow morning. But to bring it back to the course, could you discuss the striking contrast between the Nag Hammadi's portrayal of Jesus as a teacher and a healer, versus later emphasis on sacrifice and atonement?
Oh, I'm so glad for you to ask that question because that's one of the perhaps subtle parts of getting into these ancient texts. We don't quite know why they disappeared, but it could be that it was when the church began to organize itself in terms of finding its own authority and power. It didn't find room for these texts to get into the canon. I think because they were a threat to that kind of power and authority. So it would make sense that the church that needs to keep its power would focus on atonement and sacrifice because it sort of keeps everybody needing to be careful, to be obedient, and to be, kind of like under control, if you will. So Also, I think there's a question of how do you explain what happened to Jesus after his death? I mean, he's supposed to be the Messiah after, all these thousands of years of having these promises from God, and then everything is gone. So the idea of sacrifice had always been there in the Jewish faith, but now putting Jesus in that context puts a new emphasis on that. So the idea of sacrifice and atonement became very, very strong for, I think, both of those reasons. But when you actually, read what Jesus was teaching and doing and healing, I think it comes across differently. His focus in what he says is teaching, understanding God's presence in God's realm and how to heal, frankly. And I mean, he doesn't say specifically steps 1, 2, 3, this is how you heal, but the idea of being close to God and finding your relationship with God is a healing experience. So different from the sacrifice and atonement topic. So I think that we see one of those big differences between the extra-canonical and canonical writings in that area. So the idea of Jesus teaching and healing has to do with, I think, agency, that you have the capacity to learn that you yourself have the gifts of God and you can act on them, and you don't need to have another power give it to you or take it away from you. So that's probably, I think, the biggest contrast between the Nag Hammadi picture and the later emphasis on the sacrifice and atonement. So I guess it also tells you that healing is not an act of a practice of magic. It's something that comes through a transforming experience of the divine. So I think later it became more of a ritual of magic. And I don't mean magic the way we mean it now, but I mean the kind of magic where you say spells and then you expect the divine to do something because you said the spell. And that would be kind of a typical act of magic at that time. But I think what Jesus was doing with his teaching was feel the divine changing you. And when you do, then you are finding yourself healed. And I mean, again, healing having to do with not only bodily freedom, but just even living in a way that doesn't feel like you're a victim of the Roman oppression or violence or whatever. You find something within you that says, I'm worth something. I have a life because God cares about me. I think it's a very different kind of focus.
Yeah, yeah, and again, just going back to my earlier point, I really love how you use the language of agency,
Yeah.
and I think that's again quite profound for modern peoples, and it's something else I kind of notice when I'm talking to people, and again, even people who sort of have a good setup, a good situation, they don't feel like they have a lot of agency in their life, so it's very very interesting. But, of course, we can, go on all day because there's so much of these texts, so much to talk about, but I should keep moving on to a topic that I know you're quite passionate about and one that I'm quite passionate about, and I think something else that the public is quite passionate about, which is the divine female figures, the important female figures. So we have Mary as a teacher. There's figures like Sophia, Noria in these texts. Yeah, how does this representation of the divine feminine, as well as women as teachers, leaders, and interpreters, challenge our understandings of early Christian theology? And perhaps I put early in there, but I can also just say Christian theology.
Yeah. And I'd love to call it Magdalene Christianity. But we won't go there quite yet. Oh, yes, you're right. I do love this. I think the reason I'm so drawn to this is not just because I'm a woman who wants to be recognized as a woman. That's not the issue. I think the point is that by finding the female leadership and the divine feminine in these texts shows a bigger picture of what the divine means in the human experience for everybody. For example, in the Gospel of Mary, we see Mary who leads by teaching, not by doctrinal power or authority. And that's, again, another a gift of the feminine approach to what teaching is about. Sophia and Noria, I think of them as saving by highlighting everyone's relationship to the divine. So they are not saving by just being almost magical saviors, but they illustrate, they show you your relationship to the divine. In fact, they, I think, make it. I mean, we wonder about Jesus. Is he human or divine, or is he fully divine, fully human? We wonder how that relationship works. Well, Sophia and Noria do the same thing, only I think the difference with them is that they show that we all kind of have that capacity to recognize there's a divine source of something within me. I feel quite human, but there's something I have access to in the divine. And I think that's what Sophia and Noria bring to our attention. With Jesus, we tend to put him on a pedestal that says, that's Jesus and nobody else is like that. But Sophia and Noria give us a chance to think about, what would that feel like if I could be like that? And then, I said this kind of tongue in cheek, but actually, if we were to think about a Magdalene Christianity, if Mary Magdalene really had been an apostle to the apostles and a leader that I think she was, I do ponder what Christianity would be like that would be different from the Roman hierarchical model. And I can suppose I can leave that for everybody to think about, but it does leave me really thinking that the presence of the divine feminine changes our view of how we understand the divine, I think, and that's why that's so important. So, yes, I'm interested in female leadership, but I do think it's much more than that too.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And there's something really profound there too, where, even if you have some exposure to these texts, with Mary Magdalene, understanding that she's not just a passive receptor, right? Which you can kind of see maybe in the canonical gospels, but that she is a teacher and a leader
Yeah.
who is having these Gnostic revelations and putting, I'm assuming, because language is interpretation at the end of the day. She has her own interpretation, and she's going out and teaching and healing, and it's not this passive thing, right? It's not just this vision of Jesus. It's not just seeing Jesus at the resurrection and being like, hey, I saw Jesus in the garden. It's and I think you're right. We'll never be able to prove it, but I think there is something historical there. So it would be we at least had some opportunity to reclaim that in the modern era.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. So we really okay. So the texts, they seem to present the apostles more as students and authorities. And you mentioned the Roman hierarchical model. How does this perspective challenge kind of traditional church hierarchies?
Well, this is taking me back to the letter of Peter to Philip, I think, because I think in that text, it starts off with the disciples or the students of Jesus scared to death, literally. They think they're going to die, and they're praying because Jesus is gone. He's already died, and they are left without him, wondering what in the world they do. Because if Jesus died, what's going to happen to them? So they're scared for good reason. And in their prayer, they turn to, and this is a story because it's actually was written, maybe 100 or more years later than the events of Jesus and his disciples. But it's a way of remembering Jesus in such a way that you see Jesus helping in the human situation. So the disciples who are afraid are praying and asking for help, and they hear a voice that guides them. And the voice doesn't just miraculously save them or tell them to hide until it's all over. It says how to be fully who they are and feel the divine presence within themselves, to be what is called light givers. I love that because they're not, again, put up on a pedestal saying they have all the right answers, but rather they are humans who struggle and find out how to become servants of others. That's quite a different view of the apostles than what I grew up with.
Absolutely. So we need to do a whole show on the Odes of Solomon, but can you tell us what they are and then why they're so special and, why they're in this course?
Oh, yeah. I mean, can you imagine that we now have found, at least we think that these are the earliest known Christian hymns that we have available? And it like, when you sing in a church community or something, you feel kind of, together, you feel a joy, a unity, the beauty of the music. It's a way of praising God that you can't do all by yourself when you're singing in a group. Well, these hymns apparently were sung by these early, Jesus followers trying to put into praise and love and soul searching much the same way we do today. So I think these odes are remarkable that way. There's a collection of just songs. And I would have to say that most people get confused over the title. It's weird that it's called the Odes of Solomon because if you know the Bible, you know that King Solomon was thousands of years before Jesus. So this is not about the odes that Solomon passed down to Jesus. I think they're using the name Solomon just because he was a famous person who wrote poetry or something. But these odes of Solomon are really praises in the time after Jesus was there with them. So they're Christian hymns, but they also show evidence of the blend of Jewish and Jesus following people, so that division between Jews and Christians hasn't taken place yet. But it's still a wonderful praise and a love and joy. There are also images of the divine feminine in them, so that it's again more evidence of that feminine influence in the writing. Then, and most of all, I think that they just convey a deep, heartfelt prayer for finding the relationship with the divine. They're beautiful.
So, my final question, which we have been addressing throughout the entire interview, but given the emphasis on direct spiritual experience, inner transformation in the Nag Hammadi text, how do you see these ancient writers speaking to contemporary spiritual seekers? Because the great thing about this course is it is academic, and as I said, you got some of the best scholars out there who are lecturing. But if you are a person of faith, even if the particular scholar isn't coming from that perspective, I think there's a lot here, regardless of your spiritual path, that you can benefit from. So I'm wondering if you can agree, and how you can see it speaking to people right here, right now. It's not just a historical curiosity.
What a great question. You're a good interviewer because you get at the heart of this. And I do think what you just said here is at the heart of why these ancient texts are so crucial for the world to know right now. As you also mentioned earlier, that there's so much questioning about religion right now and what it means. We have to find that if religion isn't practical, what's the point? I mean, it used to be, I think, that religion was so important because if you didn't do it right, you would really feel the threat of hell afterwards. I don't think as many people are as afraid of hell as they used to be. So then now the question is, well, what's the point of religion anyway? So I think that people are leaving churches generally these days because they're hungry for spiritual meaning. And these texts feed us in that way. They they help us to think, to gain gnosis. I don't know how else to say it. Gain a spiritual understanding, um, a right to ask questions of God. I mean, that's a remarkable thing to find out. Why do I exist? Who am I? What am I doing in the world? And those are powerfully important questions. They give us shape to our lives, to the daily things we do, as well as the great big things we do in our lives. They just reorient our lives, I think, toward a loving God, where actually we learn to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves, more than hair splitting arguments over doctrinal positions. So it has to do very much with living a life of love that's transformative. And again, going back to that word of having agency, you have the capacity to be the good that you want to be.
Yeah. Wow, amazing. So, folks, go to earlychristiantext.com and do yourself a favor and take the course. It's free. Come on, it's free. And in a course, because it is online forever, you're a busy person, you can pick away at it. You can take a lecture here and there. Or if you have some more time and you want to study with the course with Shirley, then the hybrid registration is coming up soon. Is that right, Shirley? For people.
Yeah, we just started a course yesterday, but there'll be another one starting up in May.
Oh, great. Fantastic, May. So make sure you do that, folks. Earlychristiantext.com. My quick commercial is you can help us keep the show going by patreon.com/Gnostic. You can toss us a few bucks there. One-time donations at paypal.me/Gnostic. And we understand if you can't help us out financially, but if you want to help us, you can share the show. You can tell people about the show. You can like, subscribe, leave good reviews. All this stuff helps us keep the show going, get it out there. That's sort of the way the internet works, the algorithm works, what have you. Shirley, thanks so much for coming on. I really love this. I really loved what I've taken into the course. I haven't taken the whole thing yet, but I'm really awesome that this resource is here for me, and I'm sure we will talk soon.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much. Great to be with you.
Take care. Bye.
Dr. Paulson also has a great blog post on earlychristiantexts.com that goes through 10 points on why the Nag Hammadi writings matter so much for the world, right here, right now. The link is in the show notes, so check it out for yourself and share it with anyone you think might be curious about this topic.